right, just want to thank you all for joining today. As all of you know, I'm Noah White, and today we're just going to discuss some of the positives that I believe came from the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Now, I want you guys to meet Dalton. He is a 24-week-old premature birth, so he was born at 24 weeks out of the usual 40. Now, the reason that 24-week mark is so important is it is the determined age of viability. And while Roe v. Wade was in effect, it was a federal protection for the right to abortion up to 24 weeks, so that age of viability. Now, like I said, that was overturned in June of 2022 in a landmark Supreme Court decision. And what that's resulted in is today we have laws that vary state by state. And as a result, 31 states and the District of Columbia allow for abortions up to or past that 24-week mark. And in addition, 9 actually have no gestational ban. So there's no point that's too late for an abortion in the pregnancy. Now, ultimately, I think that the overturning of Roe v. Wade was a very important first step. But as Christians, we bear the responsibility to protect innocent life, not just to the point of birth, but after as well. Now, throughout this speech, we're going to take a look at a couple of points that I believe indicate why this was a positive and why we should take the fight further to protect life. So ultimately, how complete is our bodily autonomy? When does personhood really begin? And who bears the responsibility of an unwanted pregnancy? So jumping in, how autonomous are we actually, right? The argument is always my body, my choice when it comes to pro-choice advocates. Now, obviously, in kind of the small scale, that argument holds up because I can take Tylenol if I have a headache, or I can drink water if I'm thirsty. But if we take it to the nth degree and we look at some more extreme cases such as drug use or prostitution, those are actions that are primarily taken against oneself, but they're illegal, right? And so ultimately, when it comes to man-made laws, we see that we do not have full autonomy in that case. When we look to scripture, ultimately we see in 1 Corinthians 6 that our bodies are temples, and God is the ultimate authority over that temple. So if we see both in scripture and in man-made law that we do not have complete autonomy over our bodies. Now, this entire argument hinges upon the idea that a child is a part of the mother's body and not a unique entity, right? And that leads me into my next point of ultimately that personhood begins at the moment of conception. We see in Psalm 139 that God knit me together in my mother's womb, right? And that is the entire time, the moment of conception all the way through. So using this idea of personhood beginning at conception, if we jump over to Exodus 20, we see that we are given the command not to murder, the commandment not to murder. And so ultimately, that is a clear, condemnation of abortion. Now, in addition to that, we know that scientifically, every child has their own genetic identity that is separate and unique from the mother's. So they are connected but separate from the mother, very much the same as a child who's been born but is still breastfeeding, right? Ultimately, relying on the mother for life as a life giver, but a separate entity. Now, again, one of the biggest arguments for abortion that is often presented is that children of demanding circumstances, so children that are facing handicap, or children that might be facing financial, difficulty, or children that are the result of traumas such as incest or rape, that those children should not have to be brought into the world. Now, if we look to scripture first, Genesis 1:27 states that all man was made in God's image. Now, this really covers it all, right? But specifically, if we look at those handicapped children, this means that they, just like you and I, were made in God's image, and there's a will and a plan for their life. Now, secondly, if we're looking at instances of trauma where children are the result, Scott Ray in his book, Moral Choices, states that you cannot justify the homicide of another to relieve the mental distress of a trauma such as rape. So obviously, if there was the unfortunate circumstance and you were to go out of your way after the fact and murder a rapist, obviously it could be justified, but in a court of law, that would be premeditated murder. With unborn children, it is the exact same. Now, in the case of financial distress, right? Mark Jones, in his book Talking About Ethics, notes that 75% of women who have abortions are under the federal poverty line. Now, obviously, this is an incredibly expensive and difficult financial situation to navigate, as Investopedia notes that the average childbirth is right at around $20,000 in the United States. So where are we left to help navigate this? Well, as Christians, Luke 11:41 plainly states to be generous to the poor. So what does that look like? To me, it looks like providing childcare and transportation to members of our church and members of our community, helping them so that they can pursue careers and seek out financial independence themselves. In addition to that, I think it looks like smaller acts such as home or car maintenance. Obviously, these are significant expenses that many people face. And if you're not prepared, it can really set you back financially. And then smaller in scope, even to that, is something like a meal train, right? Just physically feeding those in need and physically being the hands and feet of Christ. So in conclusion, just want to cover a couple of key points here again. I believe it is our responsibility to care for the innocent children and by association, their families. On top of that, it's only possible if we recognize the truth that bodily autonomy is not a protected right, and ultimately neither is taking another person's life outside of this specific scenario in which it's still legal in 31 states to have a late-term abortion. That said, my challenge to you is to seek out opportunities to help. Be the person that you claim to be, regardless of how you feel on the issue. And just to close, I want to leave you with this. This is Dalton today, and I think that this is the greatest story of a reason why we should protect innocent life, if not for all, then at least for the one. Thank you.